fair amount of sifting because, you know, there's so many professions. There's people who are consultants, okay, and then there's people who are certified consultants. There's people who are accountants, and then there's CPAs who are accountants, right? There's anyone can say, "Oh, I'm a speaker, I'm a consultant, I'm a whatever." But how do you know exactly which? How do you make that sifting, that filtering a lot easier? Well, one of the ways is to say, well, who's got the professional designation for it? Certified Speaking Professional, CSP. Less than 10% of the professional speakers out there in the world have got that designation, right? That's the highest earned designation in the field. If you want to sift a little bit, you know, more fine grain is how many people are in the Hall of Fame, right? And speaking Hall of Fame, there's not many of us, right? There's a Hall of Fame in the United States. There's a Hall of Fame in Canada. Okay, in other parts of the world, they're like they are as well. So that becomes another way to sift it. You know, in the olden days, the only way to sift it was to go to a speakers bureau and say, you know, who should I get? All right, and they've got their inventory of speakers, and they'll choose somebody, and they'll make a commission from that, right? Nowadays, it's a question of saying, okay, well, who's got the credentials, right? So the credentials as a communicator, I should also say, are different than the credentials of the subject matter expertise that perhaps they might bring to bear. So that's the other criteria. What have they done before, right? So, for example, if you've got a conference of entrepreneurs, and you want a professional speaker to motivate them, to give them some new ideas, etc. Yeah, that's fine. You can see who's got the CSP or who's on the Hall of Fame. That might be one criteria. But on the other hand, you could say, well, who here has actually started and sold a company or done it a bunch of times? Then all of a sudden, the field of who actually might be the best speaker for those entrepreneurs, those founders, might be very different, right? And so it's a question of what it is, right? In terms of the expertise and the intersection between those two, that little intersection is one that's very powerful. I think another way to do it is to say, well, gee, how are they spending their day? So, for example, professional speakers, when they first start off, sometimes have a full-time job and they're trying to, quote, break into speaking. So you might ask that question about, you know, what else do you spend your time on? Is it getting deeper in the subject matter expertise? Is it getting, you know, better and better as a communicator? And where's the proof of that, right? Um, on the other hand, there's you know, a bunch of celebrities, you know, a hockey player, for example, a football player. They spend their day job is playing football or hockey or whatever it happens to be. So that's fine. And then at night and weekends, they might speak, right? So in my particular case, it's an interesting one. You know, working with major organizations, helping them figure out how to scale their business, leading retreats, for example, executive retreats. I spend a lot of my time writing, right, and codifying the knowledge that I learned, working with a lot of these different clients, and then sharing those stories, those ideas, and everything in models from the stage, right? And it's kind of fun, right? Because it's grounded in real world. So it's really the intersection of those two, and to make sure that the kind of speaker that you want has got both of them. Because if you got both of them, you're golden. And if you only got one, you've got a bored audience or a bad beginning or ending of your conference itself. Can I just add one other thing to the question of why, you know, why might it be so much why is the cost of a professional speaker so much? I said between 5 and 50. Okay. Why is it so much? I'm going to just point out that you're not actually paying for that 1 hour or so on stage, or even if the speaker spends the whole day, you're not paying for that. What you're paying for is an entire career's worth of knowledge that's been sifted and sorted and organized in a particular way and then communicated in a very tight, concise, customized fashion, right? And the whole question of saying, you know, we're paying for all that expertise, it's an interesting thing. How much are you paying your C-level executives, right? How much are you paying your senior team, right? Because what you're usually getting is somebody who's actually quite senior. And you want to make sure that there's, you know, if you just look at it that way, usually there's a connection there. You know, usually the professional speakers are paid a lot less, you know, to tell you the truth, but there's a connection. Um, I think there's also a misnomer about, gee, all of a sudden you show up and all of a sudden you're just golden on a stage. No, that's not the way it works, you know. Yes, all of the R&D, all of the professional development that you have to make sure that you're current, okay, takes time. All the professional development that you do to make sure that you're an excellent communicator and truly at the top of your game, that takes time, right? But you know, once a client engages you, there's a huge amount of preparation, all the research, all the time spent in their discussion groups and the industry discussion groups, all the interviews with the audience, the customization of the presentation, any of the review, the meetings back and forth, the rehearsal, um, the sound checks, the time on site, the follow-up afterwards, the creation of all of the customized resources that you might put together. If you've got a portal that you could load those things, all that technology, putting that on stage, you know, there's actually a lot of work that actually goes through. I'm sure that if somebody called me and said, tomorrow, Randall, can you speak on the topic of business growth or marketing strategy or thought leadership or any of those kinds of things? Of course, I can actually, quote, do it tomorrow. But that's very, very high risk because without all of that preparation and the interviews and the research and everything, the presentation is going to be a generic one. So understanding what kind of prep is that a speaker actually does is actually critical to making sure that you're not going to get just a generic presentation, but you're going to get one that takes all of that speaker's deep, deep, deep knowledge and expertise and puts it into the context and through the lens of what's going to make a difference to the audience to get them to actually take that next step. And that's the real challenge, right? And that's the real job. And it's fun. It's never the same.